Please be seated.
Private Member's Motion Number 2 of 2025. Implementation of a sex offender registry and enhanced victim protection measures, to be moved by the elected member for Bordentown East.
I recognize the elected member for Bordentown East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move Private Member's Motion Number 2 of 2025, implementation of a sex offender registry and enhanced victim protection measures, which reads, whereas the Cayman Islands government recognizes the paramount importance of ensuring the safety, dignity, and well-being of all residents of the Cayman Islands, including the safeguarding of our communities from the devastating impacts of sexual crimes. And whereas the Cayman Islands lacks an existing centralized system to track and monitor convicted sexual offenders upon release, which limits law enforcement's ability to manage risks to the community. And whereas the current rehabilitation measures in place for victims and offenders of sexual crimes leaves gaps in recovery support for victims and effective reintegration for offenders. And whereas the establishment of a sex offender registry has been demonstrated in other jurisdictions to be a critical tool in monitoring offenders and enhancing public safety. Be it therefore resolved that this Honorable Youth Parliament considers the implementation of a sex offender registry accessible to law enforcement agencies and, where deemed necessary, the public, with strict guidelines to protect individual rights while prioritizing community safety. Be it further resolved that this Honorable Youth Parliament considers the institution of a structured rehabilitation process for both offenders and victims, with mandatory periodic assessments for offenders to monitor progress and ensure public safety.
Private Member's Motion Number 2 of 2025 has been duly moved. Is there a seconder to the motion? I recognize the elected member for Cayman Brac East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second Private Member's Motion Number 2 of 2025. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The motion has been duly moved and seconded. Does the mover wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how can we be our neighbors' keepers, but we don't even know if they're jeepers creepers? The opposition must join us as defenders and peacekeepers, our people's leaders and not vote seekers. Mr. Speaker, as our people's representatives, are we not tired of seeing these protests? Have we gone deaf to the cries of our Caymanian people? Have we gone blind to their tears? Do we not feel the pain of their suffering? We must not leave this honorable house without having done something, because how honorable would we actually be? This motion is a response to a public outcry, and we are doing exactly what we were put here to do. I propose a tiered sex offender registry, enhanced victim protection measures, and offender rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, who can stand and say enough is being done? Before the opposition stands to discredit this motion, I urge them to put politics aside, listen to the proposal, and join us, the government, as we take a pivotal step towards a safer Cayman Islands. First off, let's explore the proposed tier system. We propose a public-private registry where we assess the propensity of offenders to reoffend before their lives change forever. While we prioritize victims, this motion isn't an extra punishment for offenders. It is an opportunity to address the underlying causes of their behavior through enhanced and targeted rehabilitation. It is about giving them a fair chance to reintegrate into society. It is not about isolation. It is about supervision. Tier 1 offenders who have been assessed to pose a lower risk to reoffend will be placed on a private registry. They will go through a structured rehabilitation program that aims to address their human and criminogenic needs. There will also be random check-ins ensuring compliance with our enhanced victim protection measures, alcohol and drug testing, and a ban from entering sensitive locations like schools, daycares, geriatric facilities, and others. Failure to adhere to these standards will result in increased supervision and restrictions or reincarceration. For Tier 2 offenders who have been assessed to pose a higher risk to reoffend, They will be placed on a public registry so that our communities can be aware of that risk. These individuals will be subject to the same restrictions as those in Tier 1, but at a more intensified level. In addition to that,
I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
no.
Please continue.
These individuals will be subject to the same restrictions as those in Tier 1, but at a more intensified level. In addition to that, community notifications will be given at and around their place of residence to allow their neighbors to be vigilant. In Tier 3, for rare and extreme cases where an individual is assessed and found to be an extreme risk to our communities, this individual will have the same restrictions as Tier 2, and in addition, GPS tracking for enhanced monitoring. They will also be put in a more intensive rehabilitation program so that, despite their high propensity to reoffend, they too may have a chance at reintegration. Provisions will be implemented through regular assessments and tier adjustments. If an offender's risk of reoffending is found to have escalated, they will be promptly moved to a higher tier to ensure enhanced supervision. Conversely, as a reward for active engagement in the rehabilitation process, offenders demonstrating significant progress will have the opportunity to be downgraded to a lower tier, encouraging their commitment.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Do you give way?
Yeah.
Does this honorable member have an outline of how significantly this change will be judged by? Or, is there an outline for this? Is there an outline on how, is there an outline for the judgment? Like, is there a basis for the judgment that they're going to be making on how significantly they've changed?
Thank you for that question. If you just listen and let me get through the rest of the speech, you'll hear a prompt answer for that. Mr. Speaker, can I continue?
Yes, you may.
As far as staying on the list is concerned, after completing the minimum mandated number of years, the offender will have the opportunity to apply for removal from the registry after intense assessment and evaluation. The minimum number of years are 5, 10, and 15 for Tier 1, 2, and 3 respectively. Upon applying for removal, if an offender fails their evaluation or assessment, they will remain on the list for an additional 3 years before being able to reapply. Mr. Speaker, I also propose the establishment of a Sex Offender Supervision Unit, SOSU, to ensure effective and non-political management, oversight, and enforcement. This will be the primary body responsible for the administration and compliance of the registry. The unit will consist of representatives from key agencies, which my colleague and seconder will discuss in detail. She will also discuss the research boards on the unit and the bodies that will work with the unit to ensure effective monitoring and rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, we teach our children not to talk to strangers, to come inside when the street lights turn on. But Cayman is slowly becoming a place where blowing a whistle and yelling, "Stranger danger," won't be enough. We can no longer afford to bury our heads in the sand, clinging to outdated notions of privacy, while the potential for harm festers within our community. We must acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. Sexual offenses occur here in our islands, and the absence of a registry leaves us dangerously ill-equipped to protect those at risk. Who dares to disagree that sexual offenses are among the most outrageous violations of human dignity, inflicting deep and lasting harm on victims, their families, and the very fabric of our society? If you dare to disagree, then vote against this motion. But for those in agreement, let us not allow the upcoming election to influence our response to this motion. Let us be non-political in our pursuit of ensuring that our victims can regain hope in our society and in their leaders. Let us stand together as a shield for the broken souls and a bridge for the offenders to break their cycles and reintegrate into our society, posing less of a risk. We understand the complexities of this problem, but I can assure you that this registry will work. So the question is, do you understand the urgency of action? Mr. Speaker, I want to end speaking directly to the people of the Cayman Islands. We hear you. We are here for you and to serve you. We are humbled by the trust you have put in us, and we stand here today to ensure that you get exactly what you voted for. In closing, I want to thank the government for their support in drafting and presenting this motion, and I want to urge the opposition to join us as we address the pain of our people. Let this critical motion be passed unanimously. Our people deserve that much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the elected member for Cayman Brack East.
Mr. Speaker, as a seconder of this motion, I stand here today in full support. We are at a crucial moment, one that will shape the safety of our citizens for years to come. This motion represents a powerful step toward creating a safer community across our beautiful islands. This step, Mr. Speaker, changes the direction of our society, moving us closer to a community that actively protects every one of us, our daughters, sons, mothers, fathers, husbands, and wives. Mr. Speaker, our people deserve the assurance that their safety comes first. They deserve more than promises. They deserve decisive action. Our people need us now more than ever. They need us to show them that their government is not just listening, but delivering. Mr. Speaker, I ask that we take a moment and think about our beloved Cayman Islands. We pride ourselves on our close-knit, safe, and loving community. But, Mr. Speaker, there's trouble in paradise. The rate of sexual crimes is rising from 80 in 2022 to 89 in 2023. But, Mr. Speaker, even 8 is too much. Our people are pleading that we take a stand with them. How many petitions before we do something about their pain? How many must continue to wait? As leaders, we have a responsibility to act now. Besides, Mr. Speaker, if other jurisdictions can do it successfully, why can't we? The mover has outlined our tiered registry, which balances victim protection with offender rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, the proposed Sexual Offender Supervision Unit, SOSU, will ensure its effective oversight. This will consist of
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
No, I do not.
Please continue.
This will consist of representatives from the RCIPS, the Department of Public Safety Communications, the prison, the Human Rights Commission, Youth Services, and Child Protection agencies. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not just about filling seats. The members of the SOSU will be appointed based on their expertise. They will be nominated by the Minister and Chief Officer of the relevant ministry and approved by the Deputy Governor and Her Excellency, the Governor. This ensures that only those who meet the highest standards of integrity are entrusted with this critical role. The first body under the SOSU will ensure supervision and compliance. This expert team, composed of law enforcement, social workers, and corrections professionals, will balance monitoring with support. Their role isn't just enforcement, it's guidance. By balancing restrictions with support, they ensure offenders meet effective reintegration standards. The second body will drive
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
No, I do not.
Please continue.
The second body will drive rehabilitation, the core of this motion. Criminal behavior has deep-rooted causes, such as child abuse, and effective rehabilitation demands personalized intervention. Therapists, counselors, and criminologists will address emotional regulation.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Okay, so is the honourable member aware that the Department of Community Rehabilitation already has programs structured towards sex offenders, like to help them upon release? And are they aware that there's also the Conditional Release Board that makes the decisions upon, or if the person is ready to be released from prison?
Elected member.
Mr. Speaker, while the Department of Community Rehabilitation plays an important role in offender reintegration, it is not structured to provide the level of active, specialized monitoring and intervention that the Sexual Offender Supervision Unit, SOSU, would. May I continue with my speech?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By continuously improving our approach, we won't just respond to crime, we'll work to prevent it. But while we work to give offenders a second chance, we must never forget the victims, those whose lives have been shattered by these crimes. They have been through unimaginable pain, and we owe it to them to offer specialized care, emotional healing, and the support they need to rebuild their lives. Through counseling, legal aid, and advocacy, we will stand with the victims, not just in words, but in real action. We owe them a system where their voices are heard, their pain is validated, and their path to healing is supported every step of the way. Because, Mr. Speaker, true justice isn't about punishing offenders alone. It's about mending the broken lives of those who have suffered the most. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I ask the opposition to look past politics. Our people need action, and they need it now. Mr. Speaker, today, we have an opportunity to make a pivotal change. Let us act with resolve, compassion, and a commitment to take a firm stand for justice and protect those who need us most. Together, we can show the people that their government is listening, and more importantly, delivering. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honourable Minister for Sustainability and Climate Resiliency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I do not just rise to speak, but I rise to sound the alarm. I stand before this House, but more importantly, I speak to the people of this country, to the survivors, to their families, and to every Caymanian who believes that justice is not a privilege, but a right. Because this is not just an issue buried in reports or statistics, Mr. Speaker. It is real, it is painful, and it is destroying lives. Sexual violence is not just a crime. It is a violation of trust, a stolen childhood, and a lifelong scar. It is the silent suffering of survivors who wake up every day carrying a trauma they never asked for. And yet, in the Cayman Islands, we lack the most basic protections to ensure these crimes are not repeated.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Do you give way?
I give way.
Mr. Speaker, if this is our honorable government that is supposed to be protecting us and they're highlighting the issues, why have they not chosen to put in legislation to protect us in the beginning rather than bringing a motion to highlight the issues once more?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to say that, first of all, for the past 16 years, which is 4 election cycles, we have recognized that we cannot afford to wait any longer while survivors live in fear and offenders go unmonitored. Unlike the governments before us, we will not sit on the sidelines. We are committed to ensuring that this registry is implemented now and not at some uncertain point in the future. The reason we have not implemented this before is because it has been brought to our attention by one of our parliamentary backbenchers. So we fully stand with this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, it took a backbencher for our honorable government to realize that there was a problem with sexual offences in our island.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to know that it doesn't only take a parliamentary backbencher to bring this issue to us. We have recognized it, and we have realized that now, politics or no politics, election or no election, action is better than inaction, and we have realized that now. Mr. Speaker, may I continue with my speech? Thank you.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate my question. Where's the legislation before now?
As I have said before,
Honourable Minister, Please move on with your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some may ask, why is the Minister of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency speaking to this motion? But when we talk about sustainability, we are not just talking about the environment here. We are talking about the long-term stability of our people and our communities. A truly sustainable society is one where people feel safe in their homes, on their streets, and in their schools. It is one where communities are resilient, not just to hurricanes or rising sea levels, but resilient to crime, violence, and fear. How can we build a future of prosperity and sustainability if the very foundation of our society, our people, is shaken by violence? If we allow sexual crimes to persist unchecked, we are allowing the erosion of resilience in our society. A nation where survivors live in fear, where justice is inconsistent, and where offenders are left unmonitored is not a nation that is built to last.
I recognize the elected member for Georgetown West.
Mr. Speaker, point of order, misleading the House. Sexual offenses are already illegal under the recently passed sexual harassment bill, so I don't see what the member is going on about.
Mr. Speaker, may the opposition member please restate or clarify his misleading the House point of order, please? Because I do not understand how I'm misleading the House.
So she's asking if you can please repeat what you said. Thank you.
Well, sexual offenses are illegal, so I don't see what the point you're trying to raise here is.
Joanna, you may, yeah.
We're saying murder is illegal, but that doesn't stop people from killing other people. We're putting this in place to protect people. Thank you.
And there is direct evidence
Please
that
proceed.
stands to the fact that sexual registries can actually deter sexual crimes. Thank you. May I continue with my
Please
speech,
continue.
Mr. Speaker? Thank you. Sustainability is not just about protecting our lands or our oceans. It is about protecting our people. Mr. Speaker, the numbers paint a grim picture. According to the RCIPS, there was an 11% rise in sexual offenses last year alone, with 89 reported cases. But how many more went unreported? Yet, once offenders are released, what stops them from reoffending? Right now, there is no centralized way to track them, no system that ensures our communities remain safe. Survivors carry their trauma for life, while offenders walk free, sometimes undetected, sometimes without consequence, sometimes with the chance to do it all over again. This is like knowing...
I recognize the Honorable Leader of the
Mr.
Opposition.
Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
I give way.
So once again, it goes back to the point that the Deputy Leader said that bringing a sex offender registry will not change the fact that these offenders can walk free. We have to put some sort of legislation with teeth in place in order to convict these offenders upon release. So that goes back to the point. Can you clarify how this will be effective in reducing these crimes as the government is saying?
Our motion brings 2 points. 1, having the sex offender registry, and 2, having multiple and improving on our rehabilitation programs. So if the honorable member would allow me to continue with my speech, he would hear about these rehabilitation programs that are also going to be expounded on by the Honorable Minister of Health. Thank you. May I continue with my speech?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. This is like knowing a hurricane is coming, but refusing to build stronger shelters. We cannot just sit back and hope these crimes do not happen again. Hope is not a strategy. Action is. That is why this government has proposed the Sexual Offender Supervision Unit, SOSU, and a tiered sex offender registry. Mr. Speaker, while tracking and supervision are essential, they are not enough. We will also guarantee offenders receive proper rehabilitation to break that cycle of violence, while ensuring...
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
I give way.
Mr. Speaker, your Honorable Minister mentioned that some of these crimes go unreported. If these crimes are unreported, how is this sexual offender registry going to help if they don't know that it happened in the first place?
May the opposition member please restate her question more clearly?
Mr. Speaker, previously in her speech, she stated that some of these crimes go unreported, correct? And I'm asking now, if these crimes are unreported, how are you supposed to track these people if you know nothing of these instances?
I would like to say that I said how many more. I am asking a question, Mr. Speaker. There are several around the Cayman Islands that are not reported, but that is due to shame. And as a fact, Mr. Speaker, there are several that are already convicted sex
I recognize
offenders.
the elected member for Northside.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Do you give way?
No, I do not give way.
Very
May I
well,
continue
please
with
continue.
my speech? Thank you. We will also guarantee that offenders receive proper rehabilitation to break that cycle of violence, while ensuring that survivors receive long-term psychological and legal support, because healing does not end when a trial does. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we also recognize our people's possible human rights concerns with these new programs. That is why we propose several safeguards, as detailed by my fellow colleagues, to ensure fairness while prioritizing the protection of our communities. A resilient nation is a prepared nation, and where we do not wait for disaster to strike before acting. A sustainable society does not just ignore the well-being of its people. Let us build a Cayman Islands where no one has to live in fear, where communities.
I recognize the elected member for Northside.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Do you give way?
I give way.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Honourable Minister, why has the government waited for the last 8 weeks of their term to decide they want to protect Caymanians?
I would like to say to that point, Mr. Speaker, that I have already answered that question, so I don't understand why there was a need to ask that question again. May I continue with my speech, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Let us build a Cayman Islands where no one has to live in fear, where communities are protected, and where sustainability is not just about the land, Mr. Speaker, but about the people who call it home. Mr. Speaker, I urge my fellow members here, stand with the victims and the rehabilitation of offenders. Stand with justice. Stand with those who cannot speak for themselves. The time for discussion is over, and the time for action is right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the elected member for Georgetown South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today not just to oppose this motion, but to expose it for the deeply flawed, utterly misguided motion it is. Frankly, if the government's goal was to show us what little thought they put into this, then mission accomplished, people, mission accomplished. Let's start off with the first. The first and most glaring problem. The government couldn't even decide what they were proposing. If it wasn't for the clerks and their due diligence, their motion would have been a flip-flop between calling it a sexual offender registry and a sex offender registry. So the government should definitely give props to our clerks. Mr. Speaker, words matter, just like the people, especially in legislation. Are we really expected to trust a government that couldn't agree on what they want to call their own motion? If they were this confused at the drafting stage, I shudder to think what this implementation would look like. Let's humor them.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for
Point of order
Sustainability.
relevance, Mr. Speaker. What does our having not putting in sexual offender registry versus sex offender registry have to do with this motion and the opposition member's speech?
Mr. Speaker, I just stated this point. This means that they don't even know what they're talking about. Mr. Speaker, they're not
I recognize the
collected as
Honourable
a group.
Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In conjunction to what my honorable member has said, he is, point of order, misleading the House because we did not change the name of the motion from sex offender registry to sexual offender registry. It was always sexual offender registry. However, we did change a word inside the motion from sex offender registry to sexual. Thank you. I'd just like to provide that clarity.
Mr. Speaker, according to the motion drafted, the title is the implementation of a sex offender registry, not sexual. Within the motion, there's then sex and sexual. In the first part, there's sex. In the bottom, there's sexual in the therefore resolved. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, they flip-flop between sex and sexual. Therefore, they are not collected as a group. May I please continue with my speech?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Let's humor them for a moment and pretend this motion had some credibility. This government claims that this registry is necessary for law enforcement to monitor offenses. Now this is where things get interesting. Mr. Speaker, law enforcement already has access to records for sex offenders. His Majesty's Cayman Islands Prison Service and the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service already track and monitor these sex offenders. So what exactly is this registry meant to accomplish? We shouldn't allow the public to gain access based on the whim that the government deems it necessary for them to. In fact, the government should focus more on making a bill rather than a motion in an attempt to get out of work. Mr. Speaker, at this point, the government is proposing to create an exclusive VIP list for sex offenders. If they're not careful, they might as well start issuing membership cards. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's shift to something that actually works: rehabilitation. Unlike this motion, rehabilitation is based on real, tangible strategies. Mr. Speaker, allow the government to grab their notepad and pens. For the HMCIPS have already implemented 4 key measures and a sex offenders treatment program. Let them write this down. 1. Education, providing prisoners with academic and vocational skills to help them reintegrate into society. 2. Does that sound familiar? How about 2? Release on temporary license, a structured step-by-step process that allows inmates to transition back into the workforce. 3. Employment, keeping prisoners engaged in meaningful work so that they use their time productively. And for the icing on the cake, what the government failed to research on: 4 programs, plural, and intervention, partnering with agencies like the Department of Community Rehabilitation, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the National Drug Council to provide support programs. Mr. Speaker, these programs actually make a difference, but here's where the government's motion completely missed the point. Repeat offenders, hardened criminals are not going to suddenly reform themselves because their name appears on a public list. At this stage, they're already conditioned to their criminal lifestyle.
Point of order evidence, Mr. Speaker, for the sex offender registry not being able to deter sex offenders, because we have evidence that it does.
Mr. Speaker, according to my research, I have found that within the United States...
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Sustainability.
May I get a physical copy of the evidence, Mr. Speaker? Please? Thank you.
Elected member, do you have a physical copy? If not,
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister a question. If you know, then why do you need evidence?
Let's move on now. We're not getting anywhere. Please, let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, do we really think that someone who spends years in and out of the system will wake up one day, see the name on the registry, and say, "Oh no, I better change my ways"? Mr. Speaker, that is not how it works. And let's not forget, we already have a classification system in place. Offenders are characterized from A, highest risk, to D, lowest risk, ensuring that.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Please continue.
Ensuring that the most dangerous individuals are closely monitored. So tell me, Mr. Speaker, what does this registry actually add besides creating a bureaucratic mess? At its core, this motion is nothing more than an attempt to appear, quote-unquote, tough on crime, while doing nothing to actually prevent it. As my mother would say, prevention is better than cure. If the government were serious about public safety, they would be investing into expanding rehabilitation efforts, strengthening reintegration programs, and addressing the root cause of the crime, not the cure. Instead,
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Sustainability.
Point of order, misleading the House. We have clearly stated in our motion too that we are invested in rehabilitation programs, and the Minister of Health will further expand on the details of these rehabilitation programs.
Please retract your statement and continue.
Mr. Speaker, I will not retract my statement. In fact, I'll just wait for the Minister of Health to get to that point. Thank you. May I continue my speech, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Not the cure.
I recognize the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, misleading the House. If he wants to wait for the point to come, I'll give it right now. We will have rehabilitation progress. Does the programs? Does the member not believe in rehabilitation? The point is there. We must not move on until you retract his statement, Mr. Speaker, because he's on a tangent.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to see evidence of this rehabilitation program.
A proposed rehabilitation program, Mr. Speaker.
There already is a rehabilitation program.
The one we're proposing, Mr. Speaker.
Members, we are not getting anywhere. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Instead, they are fixated on adding names to a list that serves no real purpose, except maybe to give them something to point out into the press. Mr. Speaker, Cayman Mall Road will be more effective than this list. We must reject this motion. If the government truly wants to make a difference, they need to stop making symbolic gestures and start making sense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my duty and honor to stand here, not just for me, but for the civil servants, for our hardworking men and women, and for our beloved Isles Cayman. It's not only fitting that I ensure that every policy that we implement strengthens, aligns, and supports this country. Mr. Speaker, the civil service has worked diligently, tirelessly, and carefully throughout the years to combat the issues we face around sex crimes, victim protection, and offender rehabilitation. And we, as the House of Parliament, owe it to them to ensure that this motion is fit for the job. Mr. Speaker, at the civil service, we do not take these topics lightly and have already introduced sophisticated measures to combat sex crimes. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, even before this Honourable Youth Parliament brought the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill in 2022, we in the civil service were proactive and implemented a strict workplace sexual harassment policy, ensuring that our employees are protected. We didn't wait to be told, because protecting our people is not just a policy, it's a principle. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear that we maintain a zero-tolerance stance towards sexual offenses. This highlights the ongoing work we are doing to safeguard our workforce and the broader community. With that being said, the proposal to implement a sex offender registry and enhance victim protection measures is a crucial step towards enhancing the civil service's capability in protecting our communities. Mr. Speaker, within my speech, I will outline how the civil service can efficiently implement this registry by utilizing existing structures and expanding where necessary. I will then go into how this motion benefits our government's workforce, from improving coordination between agencies to boosting existing programs. A sex offender registry could prove to be a practical enhancement that will strengthen the efficiency and effectiveness of our civil service in safeguarding our community. The Cayman Islands Civil Service has consistently expanded to take on new responsibilities, proving its ability to implement a sex offender registry. To implement a sex offender registry, we must allocate resources for a dedicated workforce, including police officers, data analysts, legal advisors, and administrative staff, as well as office space and online infrastructure. And let's be clear, this is not beyond our reach. The civil service has successfully grown in recent years, adding hundreds of employees with speed. Alongside that, Caymanian representation reached 70% in 2020, highlighting the government's ability to give Caymanians new opportunities through the expansion of its operations. If we can scale up in every other critical area, why should this be any different? This demonstrates the government's strong capacity to recruit and integrate new personnel as needed. With that said, it is crucial to recognize the effects this motion can bring to our civil.
I recognize the elected member for Georgetown West.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Where's the money for all this personnel and infrastructure coming from?
I'm sure you can confirm this information with our Minister of Finance, but in recent years the government has run a budget surplus. I'm sure we can allocate some of that extra money towards the programs I've mentioned.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Is this honorable member aware of the overspending that's also going on in the government over there, along with this quote-unquote surplus that he's referring to?
Mr. Speaker, does the honorable member of the opposition have evidence for this overspending?
I'm pretty sure that this evidence was previously stated in the previous debate that happened, a couple minutes ago. So.
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member cannot bring previous debates up if we are debating another topic. So I'd like her to retract her statement and please be at peace. Thank you.
Please retract your statement. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure he can clarify with his Minister of Financial Services their overspending that is happening over there. I'm pretty sure he has a financial budget sitting somewhere around there.
Please be
but
seated.
I retract the statement.
Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you. Honourable Deputy Premier.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, misleading the House. I just want to make it clear. There's a big difference between financial service and finance. So probably you want to take some notes on parliamentary procedures and ministries. Thank you.
She has retracted her statement, so please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that said, it is crucial to recognize the effects this motion can bring to our civil service. First and foremost, the implementation of a sex offender registry would significantly enhance our civil service's ability to achieve its objectives. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to public safety, efficiency isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. For example, officers in the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service would be better equipped to track and monitor offenders more effectively. Right now, our probation unit isn't just busy, it's overwhelmed, and our civil servants are being stretched to the limits. This intense workload.
I recognize the elected member for Georgetown South.
Mr. Speaker, does the Deputy Governor have evidence to support this claim that they're overwhelmed? Sorry. Point of order, evidence. Does the Deputy Governor have evidence to support this claim that they're overwhelmed?
Mr. Speaker, I've said it once and I'll say it again. This is my civil service. I know what's going on.
Please be seated. Please be seated. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This intense workload can ultimately compromise...
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Please continue.
This intense workload can ultimately compromise the effectiveness of our probation officers, hindering their ability to successfully monitor and rehabilitate offenders. However, with the introduction of this motion, if passed, the creation of this specialized unit, such as SOSU, would help distribute these caseloads, relieving the strain on our current staff and improving overall effectiveness. By allowing dedicated resources to handle these specific cases, the broader workload within the probation unit could be better managed, leading to more successful rehabilitation efforts and ensuring public safety. Furthermore, this targeted approach would allow probation officers to focus on their core responsibilities, while the new unit ensures more comprehensive tracking and monitoring of offenders. Additionally, the Department of Community Rehabilitation, DCR, has been instrumental in assisting offenders both during and after their prison sentences, working to reintegrate them into society while minimizing the risk of reoffending. Mr. Speaker, rehabilitation isn't just about second chances. It's about making sure the past doesn't become the future. By implementing a registry, we can enhance the DCR's efforts by providing them with better oversight, ensuring that those with a history of sexual offenses are closely monitored even after the rehabilitation process. This isn't just about keeping track, it's about keeping our people safe. This reinforces our commitment to preventing repeat offenses and strengthening the work already being done within our civil service. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the implementation of a sex offender registry offers clear and significant benefits to our civil service and the wider community. By equipping law enforcement with specialized roles and strengthening existing programs, we give our civil servants the tools they need to protect our people. This motion will also enhance collaboration between agencies, ensuring a more unified and effective response to public safety. Mr. Speaker, while we recognize the great work already being done, our zero-tolerance stance on sexual offenses, the anti-sexual harassment bill, and the rehabilitation efforts of the DCR, we know more must be done. The registry is not just a policy, it is a safeguard, a commitment to ensuring such behavior has no place in our country. As the head of the civil service, I will always advocate for the safety and trust within our communities. The civil service stands for accountability, protection, and continuous improvement. With this initiative, we reaffirm our commitment to keeping our institutions strong, our policies effective, and our people safe. Mr. Speaker, the civil service will continue to work diligently to protect the people of the Cayman Islands, and I commend the honorable member for bringing this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the elected member for Cayman Brac West and Little Cayman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand today with a deep sense of grief for those who have been victims of sex crimes in the Cayman Islands. The private member's motion number 2 of 2025 addresses the rising number of sex crimes, and I stand with my colleagues to ensure a safer community for all. As a representative for one of the smallest constituencies, Cayman Brac West and Little Cayman, I can say this. As a small community, we must stand together. When there are shortcomings in how we protect each other, those shortcomings affect all of us. But most importantly, we fix these shortcomings. These issues that I'm talking about today are those that relate to ensuring and maintaining the protection of victims of sexual crimes and providing opportunities to rehabilitate those who have paid their debt to society. Mr. Speaker, the sex offenders have already failed once. So as the government, it is our job to make sure that they re-enter society better than they once were. Rehabilitation programs will be set in place to ensure that this happens. So to ensure that we give our people a second chance at being a part of our society. Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the elected member for Georgetown South.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Yes.
Does the honorable member know that there's already a rehabilitation program in place?
So as the seconder said already, the SOSU is designed specifically to handle the oversight of registered sex offenders, ensuring compliance with restrictions, tracking movements, and mitigating risks to the public. Unlike the DCR,
elected member for Georgetown South.
Mr. Speaker, I'm asking for in real life right now, not what you want to implement. Sorry, not what the government wants to implement. I'm asking right now an official program. Does he know that that exists already?
Elected member?
The DCR is not enough. Unlike the DCR, which has broader mandate that includes rehabilitation of all offenders, the SOSU is focused solely on preventing repeat sexual offenses. This is not about redundancy.
Elected member for Georgetown South.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the honourable member please retract his statement as he is not giving me the official name of the program that is currently in place.
Elected member, can you please retract your statement and continue?
The DCR contains multiple programs.
Elected member for Georgetown South.
Mr. Speaker, the name of the rehabilitation program is the Sex Offenders Treatment Program, proposed by Department of Community Rehabilitation and Her Majesty's Cayman Islands Prison Service. I have the documents here if you want evidence, but what I'm asking is that
I will say it again.
to me.
We need to move on. We're not getting anywhere. Please continue.
Mr. Speaker, even beyond the direct impact of a sex offender registry, it acts as a deterrent. Because who really wants their face plastered on the website as a high-risk offender? See, Mr. Speaker, the benefits of this motion are clear, and it has been seen to be effective in other jurisdictions. For instance, in the United States, studies have shown that sex offender registries have helped reduce recidivism by allowing law enforcement to monitor offenders and keep the public informed. In the US, for every 10,000 offenders added to the registry, there is a decrease in crime by 0.1% per year. In fact, sex offenders who are monitored and subject to public notification are significantly less likely to reoffend compared to those who are not. So this is not just theory, Mr. Speaker. This is data-driven evidence that this prevention works. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, in Bermuda, a fellow small Caribbean British overseas territory, introduced a sex offender registry in 2015. There has since been an irrefutable increase in public awareness. The registry allows citizens to stay informed about high-risk offenders, ensuring that families and neighborhoods take the necessary precautions to protect their loved ones, especially our children. In addition to this, Bermuda's registry has helped law enforcement agencies to track offenders, maintaining a close watch on their activities. This has played a crucial role in detecting violations and ensuring that offenders are held accountable, which in turn acts as a deterrent for potential crimes. These examples prove that knowledge is power, Mr. Speaker. When the public is informed, they can take the necessary steps to protect themselves. When law enforcement can track and monitor offenders more efficiently, the chances of reoffending decrease significantly. These registries do not only serve as a means of punishment, but as a proactive tool for public safety. So, Mr. Speaker, if we look at these real-world results, it's clear that implementing a sex offender registry in the Cayman Islands would, 1, provide us with tools we need to reduce sexual crimes, protect our children and families, and give law enforcement the support they need to keep offenders in check. This is not about following international trends. This is about doing what's right for our community, ensuring a safer environment for all. To my colleagues in the opposition, I leave you the words of Annie Hulda Bottom, Cayman's first female legislator. I voted as my conscience dictated, for the government if they were right, against the government if they were wrong. Follow your conscience. Defend our mothers and fathers, our sisters and brothers, our young ones who need to be protected from all the evils of the world, and vote in favor of this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, we find ourselves in this honorable house discussing a motion that is, quite frankly, all show and no substance. A public sex offender registry. Sounds nice, right? Like a shiny new car with no engine. Looks good, but ain't going
I
nowhere.
recognize the Honorable Premier.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, misleading the House. Nowhere did we say that the registry will be fully public. It's a public-private registry. Therefore, I'd like her to either retract her statement or make that clarification. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I never said it was fully public. I just said public. They said public-private. Am I right? Thank you. I will continue with my speech. Anyway, the government wants to parade this as a solution, when in reality, it's nothing more than a well-decorated distraction from the real issue at hand. The absolute lack of victim protection in the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, let's call this for what it is. Performative policy making at its finest. Because while the government is busy crafting headlines, victims of sexual violence are left to pick up the pieces of their lives without the necessary support. Where are the laws that ensure victims have access to counseling, relocation assistance, financial aid, or even basic legal support?
I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, point of order, misleading the House. One of the clauses in our motion is enhanced victim protection measures. So I'm kind of confused where the Deputy Leader of Opposition member's speech is coming from. Thank you.
And Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the Honorable Member, where is the legislation that currently governs this? Thank you very much. I will be continuing with my speech now. Anyway, all right, yeah, no worry. Instead, they are left to fend for themselves while the government claps itself on the back for a registry that does nothing to actually protect them. And let's talk about this here registry, Mr. Speaker. The government seems to believe that simply listing names will fix everything. But Cayman is small, too small. You put an offender's name out there, and before you can say Mall Road, everybody knows who the victim is. Schools whisper, churches gossip, workplaces judge. Instead of protecting the vulnerable, this government is setting them up to be re-traumatized and ostracized. So tell me, Mr. Speaker, when victims are forced to move away because of the stigma, is this government paying for their plane ticket?
I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, once again, point of order, misleading the House. It has been prefaced in the mover's speech that the registry will take a tiered system, meaning that those who have committed the most heinous crimes, being on tier 2 and tier 3, will be made public. Not all offenders on the list will be made public. Moreover, it will not be made public to every single person in the environment. It's not a headline on a newspaper that will say, oh, John Doe has committed this sexual crime. It is only public notifications in communities. And I'd just like to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition, please retract your statement and continue.
Mr. Speaker, I will not be retracting my statement because people talk. So say you sell Mr. John over here, say, oh, such and such did this, such and such did that. It going past around the island and people are going to know and it will become a headline. You can't stop Margaret from posting what she want to post. Am I right? Okay, thank you.
Please continue.
And while they're at it, let's discuss why a motion was brought instead of a bill. A motion, Mr. Speaker? The equivalent of a sticky note that says, we should do something about this. A motion doesn't create laws. A motion doesn't allocate resources. A motion is just a fancy way for the government to look busy without actually doing the hard work. If this administration was serious about protecting victims, we'd be debating a comprehensive bill, one that includes a national victim support fund to ensure survivors aren't left financially stranded, mandatory counseling services, because healing from trauma doesn't happen with just good wishes and empty words, relocation assistance for those whose safety is compromised, confidential school and workplace protection policies for minor victims and those in professional settings. But instead, what do we get? A motion that doesn't even begin to address the systematic failures that allow sexual violence to persist in our society. Mr. Speaker, this government loves to show up with band-aids for broken bones. They act like we should be grateful for their little half-baked, last-minute ideas, as if Caymanians can't see through the political smoke and mirrors. But the people are tired of performative governance, tired of politicians who make grand speeches but fail to enact real change, and quite frankly, tired of a government that only pretends to care when election season is around the corner. Mr. Speaker, the government claims they're fighting for victims, yet their actions, or lack thereof, say otherwise. They could have drafted a real enforceable legislation, but instead they chose the easy way out, a registry that does more harm than good, leaves victims vulnerable, and opens the door to further crime. If they truly wanted justice, they'd be drafting policies that ensure victims receive the support they need, rather than creating a system that does little more than broadcasting the failures of our justice system. We all know election coming up, and this government is yet to show their value. Mr. Speaker, protecting victims is not optional. It is a fundamental duty of any responsible government. But what we have here is not a government focused on duty. What we have is an administration that is more interested in looking good than doing good. If they truly cared, we would be discussing real legislation, not wasting time on motions that do nothing but make them feel accomplished. So I leave the government with this one question. Is this registry about protecting victims, or is it just another political prop? Because, Mr. Speaker, the people of this country deserve better than a government that's all talk and no action. And come election time, they will remember who stood up for them. And they'll also remember who simply settled for empty suggestions. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honourable Minister for Youth, Sports and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is with a heavy heart and a resolute spirit that I address this issue, which strikes at the very core of our society. As the minister responsible for safeguarding and ensuring the well-being of our youth, nothing concerns me more than the rise of sex crime in our communities. We've heard the statistics, but let us listen to our people. We know that these numbers do not represent the true number of devastating effects of these heinous crimes. I cannot overstate the urgency of this motion. Our youth are not merely the future of the Cayman Islands. They are our heart, our pride, and our legacy. They are the bright-eyed students eager to learn, the dedicated athletes carrying our flag, and the custodians of our culture. However, there are also the most vulnerable members of our society. Sexual crimes don't just inflict wounds. They rip apart the very fabric of innocence, leaving behind scars that no amount of time can truly heal. They steal childhoods, shatter families, and turn bright futures into shadowed paths. As the Minister of Youth, I am here to ignite the dimming flame and shed light on the realities of our youth. I am here to take a step towards a future where our youth can roam our streets without fear of lurking predators. And that future starts today. This motion is not a fix-all solution, but it is a necessary step towards what should be the goal of every member of this honorable House. It is my solemn duty to ensure that we create not just opportunities for growth, but environments where our young people feel safe and protected. Let me share the words of a young girl, only 14, violated by someone she should have been able to trust. I quote, "When it happened, it felt like my whole world was crashing down around me and inside me. I was just a helpless young child," end quote. Helpless, stripped of safety, robbed of dignity, left to suffer in silence while her abuser walked freely. How long must cases like these go on before we take a stand? In 2023, the RCIPS reported over 80 sexual crimes.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Sure. Yeah.
Speaker, he speaks of how helpless these victims are, yet is he still planning to enact legislation, or is he going to continue talking about it for the rest of the speech that he had?
Honorable Minister.
It is my opinion that, and I believe that it's better to do something now than continue to do nothing.
But Mr. Speaker, he's still not doing anything. He's simply speaking about it in this motion, not enacting any legislation that does anything. Thank you.
If this motion passes, we will enact the necessary legislation to ensure the safety of our youth. May I continue, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. We understand the complexities of this motion regarding the lives of offenders and their families. That is why we have a tiered system and emphasis on rehabilitation to give offenders a chance to reintegrate without posing a threat to our youth. As lawmakers of our society, we must support those affected by the actions of offenders, whether that be the family members, victims, or the offenders themselves. To take advantage of the existing counseling programs, such as the Department of Children and Family Services, Cayman Islands Crisis Center, and the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Unit, which all aim to support victims and others affected by sexual offenses to help with a smooth reintegration and recovery process.
I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, Mr. Leader of the House. The Cayman Islands Crisis Center deals with domestic violence more than sexual offenses. So if you would please clear that up right there.
Could domestic violence not be sexual offenses?
Yes,
as well?
it can, but it
Okay,
deals with domestic violence more.
Okay, thank you. The opposition will argue about the rights of offenders. To that I ask, what about the rights of victims? What about the rights of the young girl defiled at 14? What about the mothers who lay awake at night and praying their child is never the next victim? Knowledge is power, and caretakers of our youth should have access to information that helps to make informed decisions regarding the safety of those in their care.
I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, Mr. Leader of the House. Does the member know that all caretakers or everyone should undergo at least some form of child protection training in order to legally deal with children?
Honorable Minister.
I'm not sure about the relevance. The knowledge I'm talking about is the knowledge of the sexual predators and offenders in their neighborhoods and communities.
Yeah, but you just spoke about especially caretakers caring
Two
for
members
children.
can't be standing at the same time.
You spoke about the caretakers. Turn for Mike. You spoke about the caretakers that were, that could eventually probably do sexual crimes against these children. So that's what I was clear.
Let's move on. Thank you.
I'll repeat for the opposition member. Knowledge is power, and caretakers of our youth should have access to information that helps them make informed decisions regarding the safety of those in their care. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Youth is committed to making every effort to prevent young people from becoming victims or offenders and to break the endless cycle of trauma that continues to affect our society. Mr. Speaker, prevention is our first line of defense, and as Minister of Youth, I am dedicated to instilling knowledge in young people about consent, personal boundaries, and reporting mechanisms. Furthermore, as we know that many societal issues stem from the home, by equipping parents with the necessary knowledge and resources, we can better protect our children from potential threats. This ensures that they receive proper education both at home and in school. Additionally, increasing funding for organizations like the Cayman Island Crisis Center and MASH will enable them to expand their reach and provide continuous confidential support for victims and those affected. This honorable House has a duty to act. This registry is about ensuring that those who have violated the sacred trust of our community are not given the opportunity to do so again. It is about giving parents, teachers, and employers the necessary tools to protect the young and the innocent.
Honorable Minister, your time is up.
May I have 30 more seconds, please?
30 more seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this government is continuous.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
No.
Please continue.
Mr. Speaker, this government is continuously investing in education, mental health resources, and a stable future. But something must be done about the increasing rate of reoffending. Finally, Mr. Speaker, as a Christian nation, let me quote the words from Proverbs 31, verse 8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Let it not be said that we hesitated while our children suffered. We are elected into these very privileged seats to fight for our people. So, Mr.
I
Speaker,
recognize the elected member for Northside.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Oh, wait, sorry.
No.
I meant point of order, misleading the House. The Honorable Minister has stated that he is helping protect the youth, but I want for him to acknowledge that 17 out of 89 sexual crimes committed in the Cayman Islands are done by the youth, either they're victims or offenders.
Relevance.
Please continue.
So, Mr. Speaker, let it be said that we fought for those who could not fight for
Your time is up,
themselves.
elected member.
Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Minister for Health and Wellness and Home Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some issues get discussed. Others demand action. And this is one of them. As Minister of Health and Wellness and Minister of Home Affairs, I am standing here today to not just talk, but demand real, urgent, and necessary change. We need a sex offender registry and enhanced victim protection measures in the Cayman Islands. Because, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to protecting our people, hesitation is not an option. Mr. Speaker, let's be real. This is not just another policy motion, which the opposition fails to see, because honestly, I'm not even sure they read our motion. This is about dignity, our safety, and our country's safety, and ensuring that no one in our community feels unprotected. Sexual crimes are a brutal reality, and we can no longer afford to sit back while gaps in our system leave victims abandoned and offenders unchecked. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. It's time we step up and make real moves. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about rehabilitation. And let's get this one thing straight. This won't be some feel-good initiative with empty promises and no backbone. We will establish a dedicated rehabilitation and reintegration board, not just another powerless committee with fancy titles. This board...
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Yes.
Does this Honorable Minister have plans for the funding of these programs that she's speaking of?
Yes. May I continue my speech now?
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, evidence. Can I see these plans, please? Can I see the plans? Draft plans?
Please continue, Honorable Minister. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will establish...
This board will be composed of real experts in law enforcement, psychology, and social work. People who know crime inside and out. People who understand what it truly takes to reform offenders and protect the communities. Their mission? Simple. Develop structured, no-nonsense rehabilitation programs, monitor offender progress, and ensure that reintegration isn't just a rubber stamp progress. It's rigorous, results-driven effort. Mr. Speaker, research already proves that structured rehabilitation programs like cognitive behavioral therapy can reduce reoffending rates by up to 30%. That's not theory, that is fact. We will follow the Risk Needs Responsivity Model, RNR, ensuring that rehabilitation efforts are personalized and actually are effective. Here's how it works. Risk. We assess the likelihood of reoffending and tailor the rehabilitation intensity accordingly. Needs. We will address the underlying factors like substance abuse and destructive thought patterns that drive the criminal behavior. And responsivity. We adapt the treatment to the individual's learning style and motivation, boosting the chances of successful reintegration. And let's be clear, Mr. Speaker, this is not about coddling offenders. This is about preventing repeat offenses. It's about stopping the cycle of abuse before it spirals again. Now, I know some people are going to raise some concerns about human rights, and let me stop them right there. This proposal is not about public shaming. It's not about branding people for life. It's about a structured, well-regulated system that protects our communities without trampling on fundamental rights. We are here to strike a balance between safety and fairness. Nothing more, nothing less. And Mr. Speaker, let's not tiptoe around mental health because it's often the elephant in the room. Victims of sexual crimes don't just suffer physically. They carry emotional and deep psychological scars that can last a lifetime. That's why we need long-term psychological support, real sustained care. It doesn't just disappear when the headlines do. On the other side of this, we also must recognize the untreated mental health conditions among offenders, which contribute significantly to recidivism. Ignoring this is like mopping the floor while the pipe is still leaking. It is pointless, Mr. Speaker. If we're serious about cutting down repeat offenses, we must address these situations head on. And now, Mr. Speaker, let me say, let's talk about the victims, because they are at the heart of this motion. Too often, survivors feel abandoned, forced to navigate their trauma alone, while their perpetrators move on with their lives. And that is unacceptable. We will provide specialized trauma counselors, legal advocates who stand with their victims from start to finish, and establish shelters and financial aid programs so survivors can rebuild their lives without fear or hardship. This isn't about government intervention. We will create partnerships with NGOs and mental health organizations to provide comprehensive support for both victims and offenders. Mr. Speaker, this motion is about the people. It's about making sure that every single resident of the Cayman Islands feels safe, supported, and valued. Let's not wait.
Elected member, your time is up. The timer started late, so that is why.
May I get 10 seconds to wrap up?
Yes, you may.
Let's not wait for another tragedy to remind us why this matters. Let's act now for our children, for our families, and for our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the elected member for Georgetown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm aware this may be an unpopular opinion within the opposition, but in complete transparency, I am obligated to say that this motion shows clear merits. Our law enforcement agencies need to be well informed when making life-changing decisions. A sexual offender registry will assist law enforcement by providing them a personal profile on the offender. This is not just good policy, but should be a staple part of any advanced society concerned with the well-being of the citizens within it. especially women who suffer from sexual offenses at a much larger rate than other groups, and also children who are more vulnerable to being taken advantage of. This makes it truly disheartening to see, not that Cayman doesn't care, but that Cayman's current government is so uneducated in their own legislation, they did not even realize a record of sexual offenders already exists. Mr. Speaker, I recall debating certain leaders of this parliament in 2022 who adamantly argued against a proposed sexual harassment bill, calling the previous government unplanned and unprepared for trying to clog the system on passing a bill that was falsely argued to already be in law. Mr. Speaker, the double standard of members of this government is clear, comparing the bill to increase protections for victims of sexual harassment to a toilet, only to make a complete 180 right in time for an election. It didn't end there. They were also said to be under-researched on the same basis of the members' false argument that they were passing a bill that was already in law.
I recognize the Honorable Deputy Premier.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Is the member debating this motion or the bill that was passed before? I'm confused.
Mean point of elucidation.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. It's relevant, and point of orders don't necessarily have to come with a name. It's actually any time you deviate from the standing orders of parliamentary procedure.
Mr. Speaker, I make this point to highlight the double standard of certain members of this government. May I continue?
I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, seeing that, point of order, first of all, relevance. Seeing that I was the one who made such a remark, I'd firstly like to clarify that change is possible. And it is not my view any longer, Mr. Speaker. This motion is not the same bill that was proposed in 2022. It is the implementation of a sex offender registry, one that I stand with, Mr. Speaker. So if the honorable member continues on this tangent, I ask him to retract the rest of whatever he has about any of my members or me in the rest of that speech. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please continue.
I commend the Premier on her change and her personal growth, and I only have one more sentence on it, so may I continue? Okay.
Yes, you may.
All right. How completely ironic members of this government pulled out so many antics only for them to be the ones to actually make those mistakes. Mr. Speaker, is this an issue of protecting Caymanians or virtue signaling? Mr. Speaker, to me, this motion is nothing more than rushed, undeveloped concepts of a plan in place of actual well-thought-out policies. Let's be clear. This motion was rushed and manufactured not for protecting Caymanians, because if that was the case, they would have brought a bill, or better yet, they would know a record and tier system of sexual offenders already exists. But from my perspective,
I recognize the Minister for Youth, Sports and Heritage.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Yes.
Can the elected member please elaborate on what exists right now to track sex offenders, please?
A previous member had his whole speech about it, and I also have a letter outlining the entire system.
Can you do it, please?
That's not necessary. You can read it yourself.
Please continue.
I'm on.
Would know a record and tier system of sexual offenders already exists. But from my perspective, this motion's only purpose is this: optics. A mask of smoke and mirrors using emotions to hide their underperformance. This is another area where the government deserves some credit in how difficult this motion is to debate. By taking the easy way out and presenting a vague and undescriptive motion with no substance that changes day to day regardless of deadlines, it becomes impossible to have meaningful debate on policy, as the government simply has none. Furthermore, the government even mentions other programs not even mentioned in the motion, such as the SOSU. Mr. Speaker, it seems like the government likes to talk, but they don't like to work. Was the government just too busy with sitting around to do their jobs and bring a bill? For example, the motion mentions that the registry will be available to the public where deemed necessary, but makes no mention as to what that means, nor to what information will be available, or how the public will even acquire the information. Mr. Speaker, can the details of the victim be considered relevant to the public? Imagine the trauma that will be inflicted onto victims if the information of their attack enters the public discourse in our tight-knit community. While the government may retort that this is not any scenario outlined in the motion, I believe that therein lies the problem. This motion describes nothing as to how the government intends to implement this system. Laws need to be well informed and have clear language describing what the law does. The government has failed to provide this. While I am not against this motion in its principle, I cannot accept it in this format, as implementing poorly thought out laws is the last thing Cayman needs considering this time period of a rapidly changing and uncertain political atmosphere. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Youth Parliament, and esteemed guests, it is an honor as Attorney General to participate in the debate on Private Members' Motion Number 2 of 2025, which proposes the implementation of a sex offender registry and enhanced victim protection measures. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is not an easy discussion, nor should it be. We must strike the right balance between protecting public safety while also ensuring that our legal framework remains just, fair, and effective. Mr. Speaker, I know some people hear sex offender registry and immediately think, good, put them on a list and throw away the key. But in law, things are never that simple. Yes, we have a duty to protect our people, our children, our families, and our community, but we also have a responsibility to uphold rights and ensure rehabilitation to prevent any unintended harm that a poorly designed system could cause. A registry, if structured correctly, could be an important tool for law enforcement, helping them track offenders and prevent repeat offenses. But Mr. Speaker, we must be mindful of the concerns about privacy, about reintegration, ensuring that a system is both firm and fair. This is why a tiered approach makes sense. High-risk offenders, well, the public has a right to know. And low-risk offenders who have served their time and shown rehabilitation, that requires a different approach. Here's how we could implement the tier. Tier 1 could include low-risk offenders who have committed first-time, non-violent offenses, for example, public indecency and consensual close-age relationships, and could have shorter periods such as 5 to 10 years, accessible to specific persons. Tier 2 could include repeated, non-violent offenses, as well as offenses such as statutory rape and inappropriate touching, and could have longer registration periods such as 10 to 15 years. Tier 3 could include high-risk offenders who have committed violent or coercive acts such as sexual assault with force or threat, exploitation of minors, as well as repeat offenders or ongoing high-risk behaviors. These individuals could be given longer registration periods, such as 15 years max or more, open to the public. Under the Police Act 2023 revision, law enforcement already has the ability to track individuals convicted of serious crimes. But having a structured and organized registry could not only make it easier, but more efficient, more transparent, and it could ensure that the right people have access to the right information when and where it's needed. Mr. Speaker, we can't just talk about punishment. We must talk about solutions, because at the end of the day, most offenders will serve their sentence and return to society. The question is, will they come back as better individuals, or will they reoffend? If we do not provide structured rehabilitation, if we do not ensure they are properly assessed, monitored, and reintegrated, then we are only setting ourselves up for a cycle of repeat offenses. The Mental Health Act 2013 revision allows for mandatory psychological assessments, and that is something we must seriously consider. A monitored reintegration program with therapy and compliance checks could truly make all the difference. And strict supervision under the Conditional Release Act 2014 revision, which would ensure that those who pose as a risk remain under close watch. A registry should not just be about keeping track, it should also be about reducing reoffenders. Because let's be honest, Mr. Speaker, We don't just want to know where offenders are, we want to make sure they never commit these crimes again. Now, Mr. Speaker, we cannot forget about the victims. For them, the sentence never really ends. Many face lifelong trauma, and it is our responsibility to ensure they receive the support they need. The Health Insurance Act 2016 revision could be reviewed to guarantee access to health care services, including mental health support for victims. The Victim Protection and Witness Assistance Act could also be strengthened, ensuring that those who come forward are not left to suffer in silence, but are given the resources they need: counseling, relocation, assistance, and legal aid. Because justice is not just about punishment, it is about healing too. Mr. Speaker, I understand the concerns about reintegration. Some fear that a registry will label people for life, making it impossible for them to rebuild. Others fear that if we don't have a public disclosure, we are not doing enough to protect the community. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. A well-regulated, fair system ensures that we are not punishing offenders beyond their sentence, but rather we are managing risk appropriately. The Bill of Rights, Freedoms, and Responsibilities.
Elected member for Northside.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way, Honorable Attorney General?
No.
Please continue.
A well-regulated, fair system ensures we are not punishing offenders beyond their sentence, but rather we are managing risk appropriately. The Bill of Rights, Freedoms, and Responsibilities ensures that any law we pass must align with constitutional protections, meaning any registry must be proportional and uphold
Honorable
due
Attorney
process.
General, your time is up.
Can I wrap up 30 seconds, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and my fellow honorable members, this is about creating a system that is just, effective, and considerate to all parties involved. If implemented correctly, a sex offender registry could be a powerful tool for public safety while still upholding rehabilitation where appropriate. I urge this House to carefully weigh all aspects of this motion. Let us be firm, but let us also be fair.
I
Thank
recognize
you.
the elected member for Northside.
Mr. Speaker, point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
Mr. Speaker, I'm finished my speech. Thank you.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it appears the opposition is lost, but fear not. For as the Honourable Leader of Opposition might put it, old MacDonald is here to lead them back to reality with a cluck-cluck of common sense, a moo-moo of practical solutions, and a ba-ba of real progress. We will help them find their way out of the fields of confusion and into the form of fiscal responsibility. And Mr. Speaker, I want to ensure that the opposition understands this motion. So let me remind them of their parliamentary right to ask for clarity, just in case the simple words are too big for them. Mr. Speaker, our people have been speaking out, and this government has been listening. Offenders of sexual crimes often leave prison only to commit the same crimes again. As the Minister of Health so aptly pointed out, our prison doors are like revolving ones, where offenders leave, reoffend, and end up right back in prison. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the victims are left to suffer, often reliving their trauma. Clearly, there are gaps in the system, gaps we must close. Now, Mr. Speaker, again, trying to make this as simple as possible for the opposition, or SOS unit. That's the Sex Offender Supervision Unit, for those who need a refresher, will monitor these offenders post-incarceration. How will this help, Mr. Speaker? Monitoring where they go and live will allow the unit to identify patterns in their behavior and ensure they do not enter restricted areas.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Do you give way?
I give way, Mr. Speaker.
How do they plan to monitor and track these people? Is there an outline plan that they have? to do so.
Mr. Speaker, that outline plan was in the second speech. But to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, the offenders will have to do check-ins at the local police stations, depending on their tier levels, and also for extreme and rare offenders who have an extremely high propensity to offend, they will be tracked by GPS. Does that answer your question?
How will they be tracked by GPS, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, does the member of opposition not know how GPS works?
No, Mr. Speaker, is he
Honourable
planning to insert chips in these people? Am I confused? Am I the only one that's confused here, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, she's the only one that is confused here. If I may move on. Now, Mr. Speaker, I hope that cleared up the monitoring. And then, Mr. Speaker, the rehabilitation of offenders. You know, things like therapy, counseling, addressing human and, wait, big word, Mr. Speaker, criminogenic needs. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to argue the effectiveness of rehabilitation, because I'd rather only engage in intellectual debates. And then, Mr. Speaker, the research board. You know, research, the thing they didn't do enough of? Yes, that, Mr. Speaker. Our research board will collect data regarding the patterns in offenders' lives and will assess the predisposing factors of their criminality so that we can take proactive measures. Now, was that so hard to understand? And Mr. Speaker,
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
I accept, Mr. Speaker.
Question, the research board that you said, what would it be a part of? Like, would it be a part of the DCR or the SOSU that you proposed?
Since it would be doing research on the members on the registry, it would be a part of the SOSU. Yes, Mr. Speaker. So we can take proactive measures. Now, is that so hard to understand? And Mr. Speaker, before the Deputy Leader of the Opposition asks one more time why we're just acting now, listen, Mr. Speaker, the motion is tabled today. They can either vote for it or against it. Let the votes decide where the real inaction actually is. And Mr. Speaker, the opposition continuously paints themselves as the voice of the people. So can you imagine my confusion when I realized that only 4 members found it convenient enough to speak on? Their silence says a lot. But as for us, Mr. Speaker, this government, we will continue to fight for the victims of sexual crimes. While the opposition fails our people, we will be their voice. We will act, and we will vote in favor of this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in this honorable house, not only as the leader of this country, but as a voice for the countless citizens of these islands who are struggling with the fear and trauma inflicted by those who prey on the vulnerable. Enough is enough. The endless debate and hesitation presented by these opposition members will not protect our children, will not bring justice to survivors, and will not make our communities safer. Mr. Speaker, our people are crying out for real solutions, not delays, not excuses. Mr. Speaker, yes, we concede that it has taken time for this motion to come to Parliament. However, let me preface that good things take time, and I can assure you that this motion is a good thing. Mr. Speaker, frankly, we have seen where the opposition's priorities are. Protecting victims? No. Listening to the voices of people? No. Appealing to politics and the election? Yes. Using fancy jargons? Yes. Mr. Speaker,
I recognize the Honourable
Mr.
Leader
Speaker,
of the Opposition.
Point of order, misleading the House. Countless times we have outlined that we don't think that bringing a motion on for a matter of this importance is sufficient. We think that a bill should be brought, so we're not just focusing on the elections. So I would ask the member to please retract her statement.
Mr. Speaker, I will not retract my statement because their hesitation to endorse this motion is them saying or turning a blind eye to the people who choosing to protect, Mr. Speaker. Can I continue with my speech?
Yes, please move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as a member of the opposition said, the public will remember who stood up for them, and it was surely not the opposition. Mr. Speaker, In our
I
commitment,
recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, misleading the House. Mr. Speaker, was it not us that suggested that they put in legislation instead of creating policies that enact no change?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it was also said that we are willing and able to enact this legislation, so I don't see where the honourable member's question, not point of order, is coming from. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, in our commitment to representing the voices of our people, we have conducted a comprehensive survey to assess public opinion on the necessity of a sex offender registry in the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, the results are both shocking and deeply concerning. An overwhelming 91% of respondents believe that the Cayman Islands require a sex offender registry, with more than 71% either being victims themselves or personally.
I recognize the elected member for Georgetown West.
Point out of order, may I see the evidence on that?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, sure.
Mr. Speaker, if the Honourable Premier can't find the evidence, I would like to ask her to please retract her statement. Mr. Speaker, based on this survey, we see that there are currently 260 responses, and if I'm not mistaken, the population is pushing 100,000. Not saying that this is not credible, but I would just like it to be noted on the House that this may not be an accurate representation of the sex of it, or accurate representation of what the country believes. I'm trying to find public restricted. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Furthermore, an equally significant 91% of respondents believe that our current system lacks the efficiency needed to properly monitor offenders after their release. Let's make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, sexual crimes are not just statistics. They're the shattered dreams of young girls and boys. They're the silent tears of mothers, fathers, and families who struggle to find justice. They're the whispered fears of victims who wonder if they will ever feel safe again. And yet, in the face of such pain, we must ask ourselves, have we done enough? The truth is, we have not. However, Mr. Speaker, the evidence is undeniable, and the will of the people is clear. The implementation of this motion is not just beneficial, but it is imperative. If we, as a responsible government, recognize the need for action, then how can the opposition, or anyone for that matter, justify standing against the very protection of our citizens? To deny this motion, Mr. Speaker, is to ignore the cries of those who have suffered, to neglect our responsibility to prevent further harm, and to cover our ears while the warning bells of reform tolls. Mr. Speaker, our people have made it irrefutably clear that they want a sex offender registry, and this government is and will always be a government that delivers. We gather here today not just as the lawmakers of tomorrow, but as the voice of those who have suffered in silence, those who have been robbed of their innocence, and those who continue to carry the weight of unspeakable trauma. Right now, there are families who unknowingly live next door to individuals who have committed these heinous acts. Right now, there are survivors who struggle to rebuild their lives without the necessary support, while their perpetrators walk free and unchecked. As for me and this government, we will not tell our people to wait. We will not tell them to wait for change, Mr. Speaker. We will not tell them to wait for safety, and we will not tell them to wait for support. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, this is not about retribution. It is about protection. It is about ensuring that no parent has to live in fear when their child walks home from school. It is about ensuring that survivors of these crimes knows that their government stands with them. And let me say this right here, right now, Mr. Speaker, we stand with them. So I ask the opposition, who do you truly stand with? Are you going to push us forward in taking this pivotal step, or are you going to be a pothole in our road to greater safety and rehabilitation? We, the government, are committed to making the name Cayman Islands synonymous with safety, dignity, and justice. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I stand before this honorable chamber not only as a Youth Parliament Premier, but as a voice for a generation that refuses to inherit a system that fails to protect its most vulnerable. Like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I too have a dream that every child in the Cayman Islands can grow up without fear, that every victim can find justice, and that every perpetrator is held accountable. I have a dream that one day the people of this nation will no longer have to live in the shadows of silence and suffering, but instead in the light of safety and security. But Mr. Speaker, dreams alone do not bring action. Change, action does. So the people have spoken, the victims have spoken, and the statistics have spoken. Now it is time for us to answer. Let us not be remembered as the leaders who turn their backs on those in need. Let us be the generation that chose justice over indifference, protection over neglect, and action over empty promises. Mr. Speaker, let this be the day that the history remembers, not as a day that we debated,
Honorable Premier, your time is up.
but as a day that we decided. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here we go again. Another day, another play, another government motion built on hearsay. They stand before us, tears in their eyes, voices shaking, acting as if this register going to be Cayman saving grace. But let me tell you something, Cayman. When politicians start selling fear instead of facts, you best believe they're up to some tricks. The topic of a sex offender registry is one that is necessary to the Cayman Islands, as we see a steady number of sexual crimes being committed in our beloved isles. But Mr. Speaker, the opposition is not opposed to the idea of a sex offender registry. But what we will not do is vote in favor of a motion that is half-baked and is only one of emotional appeal. They keep saying implementing a sexual offender registry, but at the same time, they want to make it better. I don't get what, the argument is not matching up. Now, as my fellow members of the opposition already highlighted, the Cayman Islands already has a sex offender registry in place, but it may not be recognized as such, and the government already has that letter to support that evidence.
I recognize the Honorable Minister for Youth, Sports and Heritage.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, misleading the House. The evidence that I received is, quite frankly, not good enough. It does not state a registry anywhere in the evidence. It states a record of the offender's offenses, not a registry at all. It does not track, nor does it monitor offenders after they leave, and it also does not work well. The rehabilitation programs in place, it does not work well
Evidence
with
to support
repeat
that claim?
offenders.
Evidence to support that claim that it doesn't work well?
Rain has it.
Has evidence?
The elected member.
Honorable Minister, you're not supposed to call the individual by their name. You're supposed to call them by their electoral district or title.
But, Mr. Speaker, I will address the Honorable Minister of Sports. You said that it says it doesn't have a, the letter says it doesn't have a registry per se, but there's already a record of the people that are there. That is from the His Majesty Cayman Islands Prison Service, which only covers prisoners. And so we're saying, our argument is that the current system that we have, it tracks and monitors them while they're in prison. And then, for example, the release on temporary license, that it allows them to go out and work. And then whenever they're seen as fit, that's when they're fully released. So that is also another example of where the sex offender, they're tracked and monitored upon release. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Please continue.
Now, Mr. Speaker, the opposition stands as a voice of the people, as the Deputy Premier stated. And we demand that this government takes this motion back to caucus next Monday, gather the legal drafting team, and get to work on drafting a bill that actually has teeth to cover the grounds that they initially intended to. But Mr. maybe that may be a bit too much work for them, as they found it hard to vote in favor of a motion that asked them to consider implementing a consumer oversight committee instead of them drafting a bill that's been overdue for 15 years. Now let's highlight this so-called tier system. They acting like they discovered this golden bluff. But Mr. Speaker, let me tell you something. How do you invent something that already exists? Cayman already has a tier system in place. This is like taking stew turtle and turning it into revolutionary sea meat surprise and acting like you just created a 5-star meal. Government, you're not fooling anyone. And just in case the Minister of Home Affairs and the government does not know, for 2 consecutive years in the ministry's annual reports, it has been said that, quote, offender management framework is being worked on. 3rd time's the charm, Mr. Speaker, they say. So maybe it won't be the same in the 2024 report. But as of now, we will continue to assume that this, quote, offender framework is still being worked upon. So, Mr. Speaker, is this half-baked motion the fully thought-out offender framework that the government has been working on since 2022? If it is, this is absolute ridiculousness. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the motion that the government proposes, they are proposing a registry accessible to law enforcement officials. Mr. Speaker, His Majesty Cayman Islands Prison Service has made it clear. If the civil service, yes, including the RCIPS, which is in the government, the civil service, requests the record of an offender, they will get it. Mr. Speaker, no smokes, no long-winded debates, the system already works. So why is the government acting like they're reinventing the wheel when all they're doing is just painting it in a different color? This motion is not about filling gaps, it's about filling headlines. And don't get me on the part about it being accessible to the public. Mr. Speaker, this is a disaster waiting to happen. They say it's for public safety, but history tells a different story. Once a name goes on that list, it doesn't matter if they were guilty, innocent, or already served their time. Their life is ruined, their life is punished, and their family is punished, and their future is gone. And Mr. Speaker, I have just one question for the Honorable Deputy Governor. The government...
I recognize the Honorable Minister for Sustainability.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Do you give way?
Yes.
I want to ask the Honorable Leader of the Opposition if they clearly know what our motion states, because based on the statement that they just made, it makes no sense. They are misleading the House, Mr. Speaker.
Can you clarify which statement? I'll continue, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, please continue.
I have one question for the Deputy Governor. The government motion asks for, quote, the institution of a structured rehabilitation process for both offenders and victims. So are we calling the work of our hardworking, world-class civil service at the His Majesty Cayman Islands Prison Service and the Department of Community Rehabilitation unstructured or underqualified? Mr. Speaker, the staff at HMCIPS work actively with those at the DCR and other partner organizations such as the NDC to ensure that adequate support is offered to victims and offenders that aims to reduce reoffending. And at the end of the day, when the lights dim, when the speeches are over, and when the headlines have faded, what will this government be left with? A motion that's so weak.
Okay. I recognize the Honorable Deputy Premier.
Point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
Is the Honorable Leader of Opposition suggesting that enough is being done to stop reoffending?
There are programs that are currently in place, yes, so I do have evidence to support that claim as well.
Think it's enough?
The current system?
Yeah.
I have evidence to support that claim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Would you like the evidence, Honorable Deputy Premier?
No, I'm okay. I know what exists. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I recognize the Minister for Youth, Sports and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've already seen, point of order, misleading the House. I've already seen that evidence that he's claiming, and in the evidence, it details that repeated offenders the rehabilitation systems in place right now do not help with repeated offenders.
I actually do have, the evidence he's talking about is something else. I have something else for him, right here. I have emails from the Department of Community Rehabilitation, the Direction of Public Prosecution, and emails from some staff at the HMCIPS, so you can have a field day looking at that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, when the lights dim, when the speeches are over, and when the headlines have faded, what will this government be left with? A registry that doesn't prevent crime, a system that punishes the wrong people, and a motion so weak a stiff breeze of logic could blow it down like an old Cayman and Waddland dollhouse left to rot. Mr. Speaker, this motion may pass just because the numbers are on that side of the well. But one thing I am sure is that this motion may be another one that passes just because of the word considers and go up in glass house and catch dust. So today, we refuse to play along because Cayman deserves real solutions, not political pollution. Real leadership, not fear-driven dictatorship. Real justice, not a registry built on dust. Mr. Speaker, there are current programs in place that screen people before they release. And that, Mr. Speaker, is why this motion must be buried where it belongs, deep in the archives of bad ideas, never to be heard from again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, I will ask the mover of the motion to exercise her right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we stand here today, we are on the cusp of protection or dejection, the cusp of help or neglect, peace or anxiety, and action or inaction. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of this motion is just like the need to breathe oxygen. If we deny offenders and victims this vital tool that could be used as an increased deterrent and rehabilitative measure, just for the opposition to preserve appearances and paint a picture to the public that the government are vote-hungry politicians is insane. Mr. Speaker, my fellow government members have outlined the importance of this implementation of this motion. However, the opposition seems to be confused. They have called the implementation of a sex offender registry a good idea, but they cannot support this motion. Mr. Speaker, this does not sound like the voices of the people. It sounds like the opposition's playing politics. I have not heard...
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of elucidation.
Do you give way?
No.
Please continue.
I have not heard any new solutions. Instead, I have been hit with a brick wall of excuses and complaints.
I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, misleading the House. I stated in my speech 4 new solutions, but, you know, they clearly may be missing a point. So, you know, I'll just get it.
Elected member. Can you please retract your statement?
I retract my statement.
Please continue.
Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member would have stated that we are inconsistent and in disarray because we have amended the motion to be more consistent. However, is it not better to recognize an issue and amend it? Does that not speak to our cohesion? In the same way that we recognize an issue in our motion and amended it, we have recognized an issue in our community and have brought this motion to aid in amending a system that has been broken for too long. Mr. Speaker, a stick seems to be broken in the opposition's ears. One of the members prefaced that there are already existing rehabilitation programs and the need to strengthen these, when we as a government have already prefaced and given detailed outline of how we plan to increase and introduce new rehabilitation programs so that both victims and offenders are able to benefit from a comprehensive rehabilitation process. Not only this, Mr. Speaker, but in conjunction with the apparent hearing problem in the opposition, they seem to have a comprehension issue because we have made it clear that we will include victim protection in the implementation of this motion. This will come in not only more legislation, but also the strengthening of existing programs and introducing new programs that will aid in the aim of protection and rehabilitation of not only victims, but also offenders. Mr. Speaker, moreover, the honorable members say that enough is being done, but isn't the honorable member the voice of the people? that can more not be done to ensure that our Caymanians are safe, protected, and secure? Mr. Speaker,
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, Mr. Leader of the House. I did say that enough is being done, but we also said that we think that if this is a better solution, we should be bringing a bill and not a motion to come and do whatever they're trying to do.
Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I thank the government for their support, and I look forward to seeing if the opposition, who are so-called for the people, considers a sex offender registry or not. They can say whatever they want, but the decision that we make today will affect the same people that they are there to represent. Mr. Speaker, it's that simple. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is, be it therefore resolved that this Honourable Youth Parliament considers the implementation of a sex offender registry accessible to law enforcement agencies and, where deemed necessary, the public, with strict guidelines to protect individual rights while prioritising community safety. Be it further resolved that this Honourable Youth Parliament considers the institution of a structured rehabilitation process for both offenders and victims, with mandatory periodic assessments for offenders to monitor progress and ensure public safety. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no.
No.
I believe that the ayes have it. Private Members Motion number 2 of 2025, implementation of a sex offender registry and enhanced victim protection measures, has passed. That concludes the proceedings of this Honourable 18th Youth Parliament. I will now call on the Honourable Premier to move a motion for the adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this Honourable 18th Youth Parliament sine die. Mr. Speaker, before you put a vote on the motion, I wish to express a vote of thanks. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I would like to give special thanks to the following persons for their invaluable support. Deputy Governor Honourable Franz Manderson, Attorney General Honourable Samuel Bulgin, Honourable Kenneth Bryan, Mr. Joseph Hugh, Ms. Barbara Connolly, NP JP, Mr. Roy McTaggart, JP, Mr. Christopher Saunders, Ms. Sabrina Turner, Mr. Andre Ebanks, and Dr. Dax Bacedo in his capacity as Acting Deputy Governor. From the Toastmasters, we would like to thank Dr. Josette Lawrence and Mr. Mahipal Persad. I'd also like to thank the Chief Magistrate, Angeline Hernandez, for taking time out of her busy schedule to speak with the Youth Parliament government on our motion. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we'd like to thank the staff of Parliament and would also like to give special thanks to 3 gracious, kind persons who not only helped us with our speeches, but ensured that we were prepared for the debate and that we had the resources necessary. So I'd like to give a big special thank you to Mrs. Patricia Priestley, who I otherwise call her our printing press, because if you need something printed, you go to Miss Patricia, and Miss Norja Walcott for their comprehensive help in ensuring that we are ready for this debate. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, but I'd like to thank no other than the YP veteran, the GOAT of Youth Parliament, who has graciously come and lent his time to us. He has been such an aid in both the government and the opposition, and we'd just like to say a big thank you for not only your support, but adding a little flavor, a little zest to our speeches. Thank you so much. So thank you to Mr. Rion. And also, I'd like to also thank my fellow government members. They have put in so much work throughout these last months. The transformation of some of the members has been incredible, and I feel so privileged to be their premier, and I hope
that they have enjoyed the experience. Thank you guys so much for making this a great experience for me. And lastly, I know long-winded, but this is my last time, so I have to soak it up. I'd lastly like to say thank you to the opposition for, making the debate the debate. Without the opposition, there's no debate. So I'd like to say thank you to each of you for making not only this youth parliament experience, but this debate more enriching. Thank you to everyone.
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is also my last time in the Youth Parliament program. And on behalf of the YP opposition, we would like to thank the following persons for their invaluable support and for taking the time out of their busy schedules to speak with and assist us on our topic of choice. Ms. Sheila Rankin, Leda Nicholson Macasser, Ms. Damara Bonner, Ms. Marquita Douglas, Mr. Sanji Miles, Mr. Mervyn Connolly, Mr. Adolphus Ledlow, Ms. Angeline Royal, Ms. Stephanie Adolphus, Mr. Rayford Britton. And finally, to thank Ms. Zena, the Clerk of Parliament, for her invaluable assistance. Yeah, Ms. Zena, she's kind of scary, but especially when it's speech time, like if you don't have your speech, just I don't know what you're going to tell her, because once she give you a look, you know, yeah. And we'd also like to thank Ms. Twyla in her absence. She really helped us more at the start, but she was unable to be here today. So thank you, Ms. Twyla, if you're watching. And then, of course, the great Mr. Honorable Marion Porter. Yes. For his invaluable assistance, all these little spicy parts, most of it he's helped us with, and we are really invaluable. We are really thankful for your help. And of course, to my opposition members. We are small but mighty. Don't look at them. Yeah, we're small but mighty. We look about with Talawa, yeah? So, especially like Isabel and Jackie, like they were so quiet at the start and now can't stop them. So we have really seen some transformation in our group and the Youth Parliament government, all the lunches that we had together. For those who didn't come on the Al Kebab Day, thank you, so I could get my extra share. Thank you to all the food persons that fed us during these last 6 weeks, because I look forward to those Saturday lunches, and just thank you.
I myself would like to just quickly do a vote of thanks as well to Ms. Zena, Ms. Nadra, Ms. Patricia, all the Parliament staff for the amazing work that they continue to do by helping all of us, especially to the Honourable, like Raldine said, the Honourable Rion Porter as well, for his assistance all the time, and to my colleagues in government and the opposition as well. Thank you very much. And for those of you that with it being your last time, I want to thank you guys very much for your service to Youth Parliament, and I will miss you guys dearly very much, and I wish you all the best in everything that you do. The motion is that this Honourable 18th Youth Parliament does stand adjourned. Signed, aye. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. This Honourable 18th Youth Parliament now stands adjourned. Signed, aye.